What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update on Diablo 4 and its server slam, which is taking place this weekend. It started yesterday from the time of this video, with the official testing here being simply server stability ahead of the game's launch in just a few weeks. However, the reason I'm talking about this particular one is that they're making a few changes to this particular sort of beta to reflect some changes they've made based on previous feedback for the beta periods they've already been through. So first and foremost, I think probably the biggest thing you'll notice if you play through this round and you've played the previous ones as well, is that the legendary drop rate is much reduced. It was changed to reflect what you can expect on launch, as opposed to the previous beta periods where they were just throwing legendaries at you left and right by design. So this time around is more or less what you can expect in terms of power progression for the beginning of the game on launch day, which is all well and good, but they also made a variety of changes to the rest of the content that I think bear most of the mention here, with much of it coming down to feedback from the previous beta weekends. First up, we have dungeons, specifically how they were streamlined a little bit. A variety of dungeons throughout the Fractured Peaks area and presumably beyond, but we won't really be able to experience those, have all been sort of restructured to allow you to complete the primary objectives of those without having to backtrack a ton, which means that many of the objectives that were potentially in side rooms have been sort of rearranged back onto the main track to make running through a dungeon a little more seamless. Now, depending on the exact goal of said dungeon, that changes a little bit. For instance, dungeons where you're supposed to just kill everything, small numbers of straggling monsters will actually now seek you out to make that a bit easier for you. And in other instances, they reduced seconds-long channel times down to nothing, especially in instances where you had to find more than one thing. In certain instances where you need to bring items to certain locations, they give you a movement speed increase to help this out, and a lot of other minor changes, again, just aimed at making the dungeon experience a little more efficient, let's say. But on a much more interesting note, we then have the changes they made to classes, which I imagine will be the bulk of what people are interested in here. And I'm happy to say it really does look like they took some of the feedback from the previous testing to heart, as having tested a few of these myself for the server slam, I can confirm that things are feeling much better here. Now, in a sweeping sense, they've prolonged the duration of stun and freeze that can be applied to elite monsters, and they've also made some changes to class skills for everyone to give you the ability to remove control impairing effects, on top of just balancing all sorts of legendary powers. But then on a class-specific basis, the Barbarian is getting a 10% passive damage reduction, as well as making the Whirlwind and Double Swing skills more useful. The Druid saw all of their companion skills dealing much increased damage, on top of the cooldown for their ultimates being reduced to make them more useful. The Necromancer had several adjustments made to its summons in particular, which will cause them to be more vulnerable in combat, thus more likely to die, making consistently summoning them a bigger part of gameplay. They also reduced the glow effects on some of these skeletons so they matched the rest of the aesthetic of the game a bit more, though probably the biggest change was that they reduced the damage dealt by corpse explosion, which makes that skill a lot less overpowered. The Rogue mostly saw changes to cooldowns as well as skills, and then the Sorcerer saw some adjustments to Charged Bolt as well as Chained Lightning. And overall, while some of these changes are, I would say, relatively minor, they nonetheless are going to be pretty impactful for people. And it's nice to see that they're at least open to feedback on these things. And at the very least, they seem to have addressed people's biggest complaints. Beyond those larger changes in the broader sense, they also made several changes to bigger encounters, especially in the case of some bosses which were very heavily weighted against melee characters, and those fights in particular saw some changes to exactly how they were performing to make them a little more fair for everyone. And on the exploration side of things, the cellars available in the game saw some pretty big changes as well, where they'll actually give you a reward now as opposed to just being an empty room in some cases previously, which is certainly nice. Now, past all of those very visible upfront changes, there were of course a variety of changes to things like UI as well as bug fixes that were kind of a given. But speaking very broadly, I would say that I was glad playing Diablo 4 this time around did not burn my GPU out, which, while not specifically Diablo 4's fault, did make me a little nervous this time around. But besides my personal anxiety, I think a lot of these changes are moves in the right direction. I think they address the biggest problems by far, and while progression is a tiny bit slower without all the legendaries dropping left and right, for the most part I would say it's a smoother experience overall, which likely bodes well for its launch, and for a test that is primarily centered around server stability. There really wasn't too many issues on that front. There wasn't really anything in terms of a wait time or just general instability as far as servers go, though potentially that might have had something to do with the Zelda game launching, but hard to say. Overall, I'd say this is shaping up very positively, with my only real hang-up being, as I've mentioned in the past already, their insistence on monetizing this game through features like battle passes, and while they say that's only going to be strictly cosmetic, I think games like Diablo Immortal have proven that their word is not always trustworthy on that front, though otherwise I'm looking forward to the release. That, though, is going to do it for me today. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative about some of the changes they've made to the game up ahead of its release. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.